Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so excited today to be joined by Roberto Patino, who is the showrunner, writer, and executive producer of the series DMZ. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of giving yourself a lot of creative latitude when you're translating material, looking at the source material of the comic books for this. And, Rosario Dawson's character, Alma, also Z in the story, is such a great example of this, where you kind of took a character, really kind of like stripped her down and then rebuilt her so that there's essences from the source material, but also really thinking about what works well and what plays well, particularly in this medium and on screen. And was that something that you knew very early on in going into developing this material, that was something that you really needed to do for yourself? And what were some of the other examples of spaces where you did that?
Absolutely. I remember when this comic came out in 2005, end of 2005. I got it at Newbury Comics, and it was chilling. It was chilling. It was, the concept of war in our own backyard was, it kept me up at night. And it was both at once chilling, but also you kind of wanted to peek a little further into the world. You kind of wanted to see what different aspects of Manhattan had become, who was operating where, et cetera. And for the comic, they built this narrative device of a photojournalist getting lost in there and being stuck in there. And, he really, the character is Matty Roth in the comic, he really serves as a proxy for the audience, especially for the first couple of issues. He's wandering around and he's getting to know the world just like we're getting to know the world. And it works for that because you want to get to know the world. In adapting it for television, it didn't quite work for me because everything was happening to the character. The character was a vessel of exposition. And he, there wasn't a salient need. So on a just kind of a craft level, I really wanted a character that needed something more than anything that we can hook ourselves into emotionally, and root for. So that's the sort of academic answer. The emotional answer for me was that Z in the comic was, to me, hands down the most interesting character. She, is this fearless woman who regularly puts herself in harm's way to save others. She, has this devil may care attitude. She's cool. She's quick with a line. And at the same time, she was woefully underserved. She's essentially a two-dimensional character. And that was something that I kept grappling with as I read issue after issue. I was like, who is this lady? Why aren't we talking about her? So I knew that I wanted to focus on Z. I knew that going in. And yeah, I mean, I really just took the guardrails off and like you said, rebuilt her from the ground up, preserving that essence of who she was.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the world that you've built within this show, there's reference to the fact that it's been 8 years. It's 8 years that she's been traveling around different areas looking for her son.
Right.
And so it's set in kind of like a very, very near future. And it almost feels like that idea of society on the cusp now, and if all of the disenfranchisement and all of the discord going on and all of the fragmentation, really came to a head, that could be a reality in the near future in some
Right.
sort of version. And so with that in mind, with it being 8 years, which is a lot of time and not a lot of time, and wanting to kind of have that feeling tied to current society, how did that inform a lot of the world building that you were doing within the scripts, and then also a lot of the visual aspects that come with that as well?
Right. Well, I mean, I think there is a certain aspect of, this is a show that is set amid a war that is not actually about war. You don't see war in the show. war kind of exists as ghosts in the peripheries. And, I really wanted to focus on the DMZ. The show is called DMZ. It's about the people of the DMZ, and really kind of assume the war happened and tell the story of what happens next, because that is the thesis of the show. It's the story of people coming together. It's the story of a reclamation of self and of land. And it really, I wanted that distance. I'm not interested in war. I've never been to war myself. I don't, if you ask 10 different people how we might get to civil war, you'll get 10 different answers. I, for one, don't think we're ever going to get anywhere near civil war. But to me, this show is more of a cautionary tale insofar as it assumes the worst case scenario. But what it does in doing that is it elevates the undeniable human resolve that I believe lies at the core of who we are. So that's where the 8 years came from. And then in terms of the, locations, this is also, imagine a world where, all of the societal sort of pressures or definitions of what is cool are gone, right? Self-expression, there is no definition for that. So you have people who, express themselves with their hair, express themselves with what they wear, and they also have access to all of the bougie stores that have been abandoned, right? So and they're remaking and reinventing with things that have been left behind. So there is a certain degree of cultivating the new out of what's left. And I just really wanted to show a world where aspects of Manhattan that we all know have become these epicenters for all kinds of people, right? Spanish Harlem, the character played by Benjamin Bratt, Parco Delgado, has planted a flag there, and that's become a pretty Latino community. There's been a sort of Pan-Asian neighborhood that's evolved out of around the Bowery. There is an LGBTQA neighborhood that's kind of in the north, in the Upper West Side. And I just really wanted to showcase a world where people are actually free. We live in the land of the free, but we have politicians and world leaders that are actively trying to strip away our freedoms. But here in this broken land that's been abandoned, the people are truly free to make truly, their own personal decisions in who and how they want to be. So in a lot of ways, the story is about a reclamation of that land. And like I said, a reclamation of identity.
Mm-hmm. And with that idea of identity and looking at who characters become in certain circumstances, you're bringing up Benjamin's character Parco, which is a great example of this, because as we learn more about his backstory and his history, his present day version isn't actually that far removed from who he was, but there's elements that become more heightened because of the society that he's living in, and
right.
him being someone who, like you said, it's like planted a flag and taken on this leadership role, and the
Mhm.
way that he's choosing to utilize that. And so what was the development of a character like that in thinking about who they were before, really lending itself to the current, but what are the aspects that are going to evolve or become more heightened or be a little bit different as a result of the external circumstances around them?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that idea of reclaiming one's true nature, another way of looking at it is diving into self reinvention, right? And Parco is a character who his parents were immigrants. He came here at a young age, and grew up in the spirit of service, in the spirit of the can-do American, served his country, and always felt like a second-class citizen, always felt like he was, just stuck underneath the glass ceiling that was set for him. And now in this new world, he can reinvent himself and he can really kind of assert his authority. I think Parco thinks, I personally believe Parco to be ultimately an optimist, only insofar as your vision of that optimistic future aligns with his. But if he can assert himself with enough sort of, bravado and authority, people will listen, and they have. So he kind of sees this as, I guess, an opportunity to springboard his station and get a real seat at the table on a global level.
Mm-hmm. There's also a really great triangulation of characters between Parco, Z, and Christian. And within that, it also really allows you to play around with, where are allegiances happening? What is someone going to do? Who are they doing things for? And often as an audience, we don't necessarily know the answers to those questions. And the characters themselves don't always know. There's a lot of great moments where we're very unsure what Christian's going to do or who he's going to choose to side with. And so did kind of like having that triangle of three characters really allow for a lot of that dynamic in kind of like the push and pull between the three of them.
That's right. Yeah, I think, ultimately this show is about family. It's about a woman who comes into the DMZ, this woman played by Rosario Dawson, who comes into the DMZ to look for her son. And to that idea, a lot of what we're playing with dramatically is reconciliation, for better and for worse. Accountability for who you are as a mother to your son, who you are as a son to your mother. 8 years have passed, so it's really easy to get rose tinted glasses on and kind of distill everything into a very monochromatic, lovely, woeful, nostalgic sort of way. But a lot of what the show is about is coming to grips with wrongs we've done to one another and owning that, and going through that process, that painful process of forgiveness. So I think yeah, dealing with that sort of triangulated family unit really allowed for that, for sure.
And was that idea that you were just mentioning about the wrongs that we've done to other people within these characters, a lot of the genesis behind the flashback scenes where we see, Z kind of reminiscing and having these flashback moments to her son who she's looking for, because it wasn't just about the wistful nostalgia in those moments. It was also about mistakes and regret, and that journey of forgiveness with herself that she's on, as much as she's on a journey of forgiveness and trying to find her son.
Right. That's absolutely right. And I think that idea goes hand in hand with the ultimate evolutions of each character's journey, which is, from Alma's point of view, I've come in here looking for my son. I've found him. I've been confronted with who I was actually towards him. And that hurts. But it has also sort of pivoted my scope of purpose here. And in the show, that's really what it's about. She kind of broadens out with this sense of accountability to her son, to a sense of accountability to the people that have been abandoned in the DMZ. It might be worth explaining what a DMZ is. I think there's a lot. I've been living in this world for the last 2.5 years. I take it for granted, but I remember when I came home and told my wife that I have found my new project. She's like, "Great, what is it?" I go, "It's DMZ," and she goes, "What? Like TMZ, DMV? What's a DMZ?" So I don't. Basically, a DMZ is a plot of land between two warring armies, typically, armies that adjacent to one another, and both armies have determined that this plot of land will be demilitarized. No military is allowed there, so it's closed off. It's a neutral zone, and in our show, the DMZ of our Second American Civil War is Manhattan. So we have to the east in Brooklyn and in Queens, the United States, and to the west in New Jersey and beyond, the free states of America. So there's the context.
I really love that. And one of the other things that I want to talk about is with the character of Skell, because, he's not a character that on the surface we would assume has this really great artistic expression. And it's really wonderful in the moment in the show where we get to see what are the artistic pieces that he's creating, what is his voice as an artist, and what are the things inside of him that he's expressing. And so I was really interested in how you kind of conceptualized and saw his voice as a creative, and then also came up with the pieces that we then get to see on screen as a result of that.
So Skell is this, he is our boogeyman of the DMZ. His lore kind of sort of proceeds wherever he goes. But in truth, I really wanted to delve into what that actually means at a time of war, and how growing up in this island could have really squashed who he really was, right? He's been made, he's been taken under the wing of Parco, under Benjamin Bratt's character, and he's been made to be a soldier at war, a soldier in wartime. And in a lot of ways, that's stunted his own development, right? So he is this sort of muscled, scary guy, but he lives at the end of a pier, jutting out into the Hudson, as far away from the DMZ you can be inside the DMZ, in his own private Idaho, where he gets to be himself. And that's one of the ideas that I think is pervasive throughout the show, is who are these people really, and who have they become in this land? But I really wanted to kind of make that aspect of Skell's life very intimate, very personal, and also, there's a mural of himself on the wall. You can imagine he's only had pictures of himself to reference. But yeah, so that was the idea of just making him soft and almost stunted and underdeveloped, giving him a lot more track to go.
Yeah. And in talking a little bit more about the overall visual language of the show, it's got such a distinctive style. And even, with everything that you were describing before about the different areas, they've each got their own really unique identities in terms of visually how we see them on screen as well.
Yeah.
And you had the great chance to, you're working alongside Ava DuVernay, who directed the first episode, and then Ernest Dickinson, who directed the rest of the episodes. And so what were a lot of the key visual details that you started interlaying into the scripts, and then how did that then continue and evolve in the conversations that you started having with the two of them once they came on board to also direct these episodes?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of mechanical details that I was very intentional about. For one, this world is very colorful. This world is not blue and gray and dreary. That was a very kind of intentional detail to just speak to the life that has found a way here. The other, another sort of technical aspect is that this show does not shy away from big scopy shots. But while we have access to shooting 360 degrees, the camera really lives on our character's face. There is a cinema verite feel to the experience, because it needs to be super personal. The story is incredibly personal. And, so you have the scope that we showcase, but for the most part, the background exists and is accurate, but is almost thrown away. right? We're with Rosario, we're with Benjamin, we're with our characters. That was a very specific stylistic choice. And, you know, was that, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, you really
Yeah.
did. In terms of the overall narrative structure, you know, you're telling this as a limited series, as 4 episodes.
Yeah.
And I've heard you mention previously that The Wire was a really influential show in terms of what you saw in terms of the scope of what you can do narratively, and also that idea that you can have moments that don't have full resolutions to them
Yes.
if it's done in the right way and for the right reason. And that was a
Right.
great example of it in a series, you know, and this kind of feels a little bit reminiscent of that as well. You know, there's moments that by the end of the series really tie themselves up, and there's certain things that feel a little bit more emotionally open-ended for characters, but it's all done in the right way that feels very satisfying for the audience. And so how do you kind of navigate as a writer and as a creator and as a showrunner, figuring out where you need to be able to lead certain narrative arcs towards certain resolutions, and then finding spaces where you can leave things a little bit more open-ended, because that's
Right.
much more true to life as well. You know, not everything gets tied up in a bow at the end of the day for people.
Right. Well, you know, like I said at the beginning, that the show, you know, the most macro idea of the show is that it's about the reclamation of a new America, right? It's about the reclamation of this broken land, and having it come together, and having all these people of disparate walks of life unite, right? To that end, I think leaving certain stories open-ended was a necessity, because you wanted to leave the audience, or at least I wanted to leave the audience, looking forward, ideating on what was next, because that's the hopefulness that comes from Alma's story. The other side of that is, it's a very big world. It's a very complicated world. You know, you've got the war on the outside, which is complicated in of itself. You've got the idea of a DMZ, within the DMZ of politics and rival gangs, and this election that's coming up. There's layers upon layers upon layers. And in that whole sort of, you know, nightmarish paradigm of context, I really needed to distill the story into as simple a thread as possible. So part of the open-ended storylines is a result of focusing on Alma's story, and staying, you know, as true to that as possible, as focused on that as possible. You know, you want that one resolved, but by virtue of the fact that there are narrative tendrils that's, you know, come out of that, you know, that's just going to be a byproduct of what you get when you focus on one singular story. But yeah, I think it is, you know, you mentioned The Wire. That to me is the crown jewel of television. And, you know, as for DMZ, the show is about looking forward. We start at the nadir of society and start rebuilding, right? And so you want to really kind of give that an upward trajectory and leave it at that.
Yeah. And with the fact that, like you were saying, it is all about coming back to the character of Alma, coming back to Rosario's character at every moment. Was that a huge influence in a lot of the choices that you made once you went into post-production and once you were editing and really sitting there and being like, well, what is the most compelling moment of this scene? What's the most compelling element of the story here in front of me? You know, in finding those ways for always to come back to her, even if the scope does kind of get a little bit bigger for certain scenes, and then come back down to her in a more grounded element by the end.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, every narrative tentpole beat in this series is, where is Alma at? What does Alma need? And where is Alma going? All of it. And there's a whole slew of secondary storylines that duck and weave around that, but she is what drives the show. In fact, I told you I knew I wanted to build out the character of Z. I wanted to give her a first, middle, and last name. And in a lot of ways, I wanted to sort of create an origin story for Z, really capturing the spirit of the character in the graphic novel. I pictured Rosario Dawson from day one. I wrote this character with her in mind. I wrote this character for her. And that was maybe one of the more terrifying moments of my life, when I had, these 4 scripts done, and, I went to sit down, I had a Zoom with her. And I was like, hey, this character is you. It's only you. And will you please be in it? Thankfully she saw what I saw and she said yes. But yeah, it's been Rosario Dawson from day one. She's just such an incredible, undeniable presence. The story calls for her to go to some pretty profound places, I think, that can otherwise feel canned or untrue. And she just digs deep. She digs deep and really pushes herself to elevate the material in that capacity, and to make all those very raw moments sing.
Absolutely. It's a really, really great performance. And lastly, in terms of kind of your overall career trajectory and the fact that you're now the person kind of heading up writers' rooms, hiring people and creating that space for other people within the crew. Early in your career, you got the opportunity to work with David Ayer when he was working on Street Kings, and kind of described him as someone who was a really great mentor and gave you a lot of autonomy and space to kind of make certain choices and to do certain things creatively, even though that was when you were first coming into the industry. And similarly, in working on Sons of Anarchy with Kurt Sutter as well, it sounds like he's someone who really gave you a lot of autonomy in your career as well. And so having had experiences like that and people who've been real mentorship figures to you at different stages in your career, what's the way in which you now think about it being on the other side of that, where you're the person creating that space and working to enfranchise the people that are working for you, particularly the writer's room, having come up through that space yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and it's something I, carry with me, certainly, and have a very present sensitivity for that idea of nurturing from within. Just starting from the top, David Ayer really let me. I was his intern on Street Kings for a summer, and he let me shoot the behind the scenes for the show, the BTS. And so I had free reign on the set. Forrest Whitaker, Hugh Laurie was there, Chris Evans was on it, which was, to me as a 22-year-old, insane. So I was walking around with a camera, pointing, clicking wherever he wanted me to. Moving forward, on Sons of Anarchy, I joined that as a staff writer, which in television is the sort of bottom rung writer. And that was such a well-oiled machine. And I think Kurt was at a point where he was, he knew where the show was going. But he had these 2 kind of interstitial seasons of season 5 and season 6, where he knew how season 6 was going to end, but the rest was needed to be sort of zhuzhed up, conjured. And so he was in a place where he was putting more trust and emphasis on the writer's room, which was an amazing opportunity for me. And I mean, he talked about a producing boot camp. He just sort of said, go make your episode. So that was the first time I was in a prep meeting. I was in a production meeting. I was on a scout. And that was, basically learning to swim by diving into the ocean. Moving forward from that, there was the Bastard Executioner, which was Kurt's follow-up show, which only went 1 season. But he plucked me, and said, okay, hire the writers and run the room. Again, no real guidance, except I guess all the guidance you need, which is just do it. So I learned and I did. And then we went to Wales, we shot the show. One scene called for 200 horsemen on a beach. And that was the moment where I learned nobody knows anything, because you get the scene and you're like, how do we do this? And that's literally the question you ask at the production meeting. How do we do this? And everybody looks and they're like, well, shoot, I don't know. How do we do this? And then somebody's like, maybe we should call the Game of Thrones horse team. They're in Ireland. Maybe the Devil's Horsemen, maybe they can come down. Yeah, okay, I'll give them a call. And suddenly a week later, you've got 200 horsemen on a beach. Moving that, we went to Westworld, and that was basically my whole experience just on a whole nother level, but everybody's asking the same questions, right? You're dealing with this insane level of scope. And it all just boils down to the group of heads of department that you have, where you're just like, how do we do this? How do we have a little boy's face open up to reveal the inner workings of a robot underneath? How do we shoot a Civil War era fort in the middle of Simi Valley or Santa Clarita? You just ask the questions and ask the questions and ask the questions, and in time you start building into it. I think to me, all of those experiences really led me to this now, where A, it's critical to empower the writers. B, you learn by doing. And C, you just ask the questions and surround yourselves with people who want to know, who want to do, and who are down to commit. And that's really it. So it's been amazing kind of building DMZ, conjuring it up on the computer and then building it in practice, in post, and in our practical shoot. But yeah, I would say where I'm at is certainly a compendium of my experiences, and how I was sort of schooled is fundamentally about saying thank you and saying good job and keeping the people who do good by you close, and rewarding them with more responsibility and more opportunity.
That's really, really wonderful to hear. And, I want to say huge congratulations on this series. It's such a great piece of storytelling. And thank you so much for talking all about it. Really appreciate your time today, Roberto.
Oh, I so appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.